Yuval, thank you for joining me in the studio.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about Discure Technologies?
Sure. So Discure is really quite a unique technology. We've developed a minimally invasive implant in really a unique way to treat and reverse degenerative disc disease, which is truly one of the largest unmet needs out there today. And because the system is minimally invasive, it really allows us to come in quite early at the same stage as opioids before patients start that vicious cycle, and gives us an opportunity to really reduce the use of opioids worldwide and eliminate the need for invasive back surgery. So that's a lofty goal, but it's one that I'm personally happy to wake up in the morning and pursue, and really provide these patients potentially a better way to treat and not just reduce pain, but really heal the disc and restore function and get back to their normal life.
So this sounds almost like a bioelectronic that you're working with then. How does it work?
So it's indeed a bioelectronic, and again, it's a bit complex. I'll give kind of the short
Sure.
the short overview of it. When we look at an intervertebral disc, this is a very large avascular organ. So you don't have any blood supply coming directly in, but rather there are cells inside of the disc that secrete a negatively charged protein, and that creates an electric potential differential between the inside of the disc and the outside environment. And so the disc is able to draw fluid and nutrients and oxygen from the outside inward, giving the disc its volume and the cells their nourishment. In the disease state, these cells die out, and so there's nothing to create that negative charge, so the disc becomes a neutral environment. And so there's less fluid coming in, leading to mechanical pain as the disc deflates, and there's less suspension and there's less stability to the spine. But perhaps more importantly with respect to the pain is that there's less inflow of nutrients and oxygen coming in. So these cells are in a stress environment producing lactic acid, creating burn. And we also have less inflow, so there's less outflow of fluid. So you get an accumulation of metabolites and cytokines leading to toxicity and inflammation until ultimately this all creates a vicious cycle, and we see that the disc dries up and collapses. So we understood, that's really based on the literature, and we understood that the problem here is in that pumping function. And what we've developed is a proprietary electrode that we inject under local anesthesia in an outpatient setting into the center of the disc. It's connected to a pretty standard implantable pulse generator or IPG. Just quite a bit smaller than typical neuromodulation devices. And what that allows us to accomplish is really recreate and control that natural negative charge, so we can actively control with a dose response the inflow of fluid, reinflating the disc and relieving the mechanical pain, but also controlling the inflow of nutrients and oxygen, providing a better environment for the cells, allowing them to function better, stop producing lactic acid and repopulate, as well as accelerate the healing of the tissue of the disc, really allowing us to reverse that degenerative process.
That's incredible. So this technology can come in much earlier than, surgery, spinal stabilization. Is this going to completely eliminate the need for it in theory, those other surgical techniques?
Oh yeah, it's going to be the only product out there, and we're going to take over the orthopedics market.
Ooh.
No, it's a complex disease. What you generally see here in the continuum of care is that these patients at the early stages, they go to their GP with a complaint about back pain. They don't know what it is yet. They get a prescription for some low-grade pain medication. Mm-hmm. That doesn't do anything for the degeneration. So it continues. Ultimately, they come back to their physician. They get sent out typically to a neurologist or to a pain management physician, who also don't have too many available options. It's mostly, first they send them out to physiotherapy. If they're compliant, that may delay it a little bit. If they're non-compliant, which often happens, sadly, the next step is typically acute treatment like steroid injection. And after that, there's not too much. It's used to be just a lot of opioid prescriptions. Now they're cracking down on that a little bit more, and physicians rightfully become a bit averse to prescribing that. So they're just sending these patients back home in pain without any real solution, and they just wait out a very significant gap in that timeline and continuum of care until they're eligible for those latest stage treatments like fusion, where you take out the disc and fuse together the vertebrae with rods and plates, which is done at an alarming amount in the US today. It's about 700,000 operations per year. And there's that, there's disc replacement, as you mentioned, and there's spinal cord stim. And, it's neither are really the best solutions that you could hope for, because A, they're highly invasive, but B, they don't really solve the problem. It's all symptom modifying and not disease modifying. So you don't want to just mask the symptoms, which helps to an extent and in a certain portion of these patients. So that's really what drew us into this field. And we wanted to solve that problem, not just mask the symptoms, but really heal the disc while reducing the pain and restoring function to the disc and to the patient. And being minimally invasive really allows us to come in quite a bit earlier before those patients go on that opioid cycle, and potentially, if we can indeed, as we have shown in a vast number of preclinical studies that we've held, really worldwide with leading institutions from UCSF in California through Toledo, Ohio, Colorado University, Bern University in Switzerland, and in hospitals in Israel, we've been able to show that indeed we don't only reduce the pain, but we stop the degeneration progression, and we reverse that process. And we've been able to show that we move the disc from a late stage grade 4 back to a grade 1 and a healthy disc.
Is this something, once the disc has reverted back to its healthy state, can be reversed? Are patients then able to live without the device implanted, or is this a continuous device that they're going to need to keep implanted and maintain throughout their life?
It's a good question. It depends on the etiology. I always like when it depends as a response, but it does depend. It depends on what the cause of degeneration was. So if you're looking at trauma cause, where there's some trauma that caused a gap or a fissure in the disc, then in those cases, we see that following a relatively short period of treatment, we both restore the cell population and heal that tissue and heal that fissure or gap that has caused that degenerative cycle. And in those cases, we can remove the system after a short period of treatment. However, in about 80% of cases, this is age-related and a very slow degeneration process. And in those cases, even if we do restore the disc height, restore the cell population, and restore the health of the disc, our hypothesis at this point is that if we turn off the system for a prolonged period of time or take it out, degeneration would ultimately creep back in, whether that's over months or over years, because this is a degenerative process. But the idea for these patients would be to keep the system implanted long term. We could do boost therapy, so just once the disc gets to a certain health state, to prolong the periods between treatment. However, it's not necessary that really has merit, because patients don't feel the treatment. There's no sensation. There's no real risk of over-treatment. So you could just as well probably just continue doing the same duty cycle that we use during the regular protocol, because what we're really trying to do is basically follow the nature. So in a healthy disc, you have inflow of fluid and nutrients during the night when a person is horizontal and there's less gravitational pressure. And then during the daytime, when we walk around and there's more gravitation as we stand up, about 25% of the disc volume is secreted out. And that's the way that the disc gets rid of the metabolism, byproducts, and everything that has been accumulating, because it doesn't have access to blood supply. So that's how the cells remove those metabolites. And then those 25% come back during the night and go back out again during the day. So with a system, we turn on the system during the nighttime, and then we turn it off, basically opening the circuit during the day, allowing the fluid to be expelled from the disc along with lactic acid and metabolites. That fluid dynamic is crucial. Probably as important to flush out the contents of the disc as it is to bring in the nutrients and oxygen. So as we're just following the nature and there's no sensation, you could argue that you could just continue doing that same treatment over the long term.
You mentioned you're a preclinical company. What are you guys trying to do right now? I'm going to guess raise money.
How do you figure that out?
I've been around a little bit. What are you guys trying to do with that money that you're seeking to raise?
Sure. So first off, I think as a startup, you're always raising to some extent. It's always out there in the options of what you're trying to obtain at pretty much every single point in time. Startups are, you know, kind of they're cash intensive at times. Although we have been able to be extremely capital efficient to this point, we've spent just under $3 million to complete 15 studies, including 2 large animal studies in sheep in Colorado and pigs in Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem, as well as a number of bioreactor studies with fresh human cadaver discs and really almost any large animal disc, as well as build a clinical grade system in not too far from here in the Bay Area with a manufacturing site. So we've been capital efficient, and we intend to continue being capital efficient throughout our next stages. So the current fundraising, we've raised last year an oversubscribed round that was led by 2 hospital networks, both on the East Coast, which were terrific partners so far. Really great deal of value coming in beyond the funding from those hospital networks, as well as a few family offices and VCs from the US, Europe, and Israel, joining our existing investors in J&J. And now we're raising a Series A of $8 million to allow us to complete the first-in-human study and get into our pivotal trials. We have found a lead investor for that Series A, which in this market environment is something that I think we're lucky to say we were able to do, and is always a crucial part of raising funds, getting that right lead investor in place, getting the terms that are standard and are acceptable by the market. And we have still a little bit open for the Series A before we can complete it. About $2.5 million out of the 8 are still open. So I'm currently looking to accomplish that, and then the next point on the agenda is just to continue getting as fast and as cost effectively as possible to clinical data and beyond the first-in-human study, which is really the next step for the company and its maturity level and its maturing process.
So getting that remaining 2 million is a key objective, you could say, of attending LSI this year?
It is a big part of what we're trying to do here, but I'd say it's not the most significant part of why I'm here. Don't worry.
What's the most significant reason? It was to meet me, right?
Oh yeah.
Just kidding. I'm just kidding.
No, you would be surprised, but it's still fundraising, just not for now.
Sure.
Like I know the groups here quite well, the strategic, the VCs, the different investors, and overall the majority of investors that are out here are a little bit later stage focused. Would require first-in-human data and clinical data to really go into a practical discussion about fundraising. So, but I do think it's important to build those relationships. You can't expect to go to a group like an NEA and say, hello, I'm Yuval from Israel, and I'd really like to have you guys be our lead investor. It just doesn't seem to work that way. You need to build that relationship. They need to get to know you. You need to give them status updates over time, build trust, especially coming from a different continent and a different country and a different language. And, there's trust that needs to build, I think, over time. So a big part of the reason that I'm here today is actually thinking of our next round and continuing to maintain those relationships with the strategics and with later stage VCs, because, that's gonna come as well.
Sure.
And you need to prepare for that too.
That's a great forethought on your part and a fantastic playbook for maybe first year and repeat innovators that are in attendance at this event and other events as well. Yuval, I want to thank you so much for stopping by the studio.
Thanks, Nick. Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure learning about what you're doing at Discure Technologies.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.